Hi, my name is Michael Hicks, and this presentation is on the regulation deficit of unmanned aerial systems for Aviation 448. So, drones have been around for a while. The technology was first introduced around World War I with the Kettering bug, which was essentially a torpedo with wings that was programmed to fly a predetermined course to its intended target. While it was more of a cruise missile than a drone, it still was able to operate without human interaction, so it would be considered unmanned aerial systems. The other drones pictured here is your current Predator drones operated by the military, filmography drones, and then children's toys that have about a 5-minute flight time and can't go very far at all. However, according to the FAA, all of these are technically considered aircraft. So, since drones have gained popularity in the recent years, the FAA has had to become more involved, and this graph is actually representing the forecast that the FAA did for the years of 2022 through 2042. However, for drone ownership, they only went as far as 2026. You can see in 2022 they anticipated about 1.7 million recreational drones to be in use. It would be important to note that when this forecast was done in 2021, they actually underestimated the amount that was going to be in operation that year. So it is possible that all of these numbers are slightly lower than what reality will make them. But you can see that there is a gradual but constant increase in operations of both recreational and commercial drones. And then with remote pilots, while it is an increase, there's a significantly smaller number of certified commercial pilots to operate, or certified remote pilots to operate commercial drones. Now, as far as recreational and commercial, what's the difference between those? You have recreational uses, which is pleasure. You know, it would be the same reasons you're going out to fly a kite. You're playing with it essentially. You're going out for your own enjoyment and just because you want to. Not expecting pay, and you're not doing anything for anybody except for yourself. So it could just be hanging out in your backyard, or drone racing is also another pastime of some people. Now granted, there are some that get paid for drone racing, but there are some people who get paid to play video games. I am sadly not one of them. With commercial drones, their use is a little bit more widespread. It could be used for the applications of pesticides on crops. Amazon is trying to get their Prime Air off the ground, no pun intended, for package delivery. There are plenty of companies that use drones for filmography, for movies or commercials, and then can also be used for infrastructure inspection to inspect the integrity of the undersides of bridges or power poles, power lines, oil platforms, things of that nature. And then government usage. You know, of course, aside from the military, it could be border patrol, which they do usually use Predator drones. Search and rescue, which can be operated to help locate missing people. Police can use them for evidence or surveillance of crowds. And then there's also a potential use for drones to be used in transport of organs for transplant patients. There's a couple of doctors who've been working very hard on trying to get a drone to transport human organs from one point to another in a shorter amount of time and in a better condition, which they actually have been able to do, but it's not widespread, nor is it widely accepted to do that practice yet. So the current regulations governing drones, there are quite a few, but there are definitely some loopholes. So as far as recreational pilots or recreational flyers, there are some things that they need to cover, or that they are covered by. All drones are governed by 14 CFR Part 107, but in the U.S. Code 44809, there's actually a carve-out in that CFR for an exception for people who fly drones purely for recreation. And there are a couple of guidelines they have to follow. They can't fly over 400 feet, can't enter FAA airspace or the National Airspace System unless they have authorization, which there's more than just a phone call involved in that. The drone always has to be kept in visual line of sight. So you have to be able to see the drone at all times, and if the drone that they're operating is more than half a pound and less than 55 pounds, they have to register it with the FAA. And as of September 16th of this year, they are also going to require remote IDs, which essentially is the same thing as a transponder for an aircraft. It would be a broadcast of that drone's registration number, or they call it a digital license plate. Now, as far as drone weaponization goes, because there have been quite a number of videos where people strap weapons to drones because they want to. There was an assistant attorney general. He actually sent a letter to the Speaker of the House, the Senate President, and the Minority Leader. And he stated that with the current laws, the use of a weaponized drone that was used in a fatal attack, it would only violate a public law where their only recourse was a $25,000 penalty. And that's not exactly a very strong punishment for the taking of life. Now, you can have a weapon mounted to a drone if you receive authorization from an FAA administrator, and that's usually reserved for commercial uses, like trying to burn vines off of a power pole or something where it's prohibitively dangerous for a person to get to, where it would be relatively easy for a drone to reach. Another thing would be terrorist use or spy use. So if they decided to utilize the National Airspace System to spy on the nation's infrastructure, whether it was power or military bases or whatnot, if they were caught, they would only be charged with a misdemeanor for that sort of action, because there is no law governing that at the moment. Now, damage or destruction of aircraft. That is currently a federal violation, and that is anything that it's aircraft and it's also drones. So there is no distinction between the damage to a drone and the damage to an aircraft. So, for example, if a law-abiding citizen is in their backyard and there's been a drone there for a while, and they feel they need to disable it because they're concerned about the operator's intentions, and they shoot it down, that drone is protected under federal law, and if they shoot it down, it's a federal offense because it's a damage or destruction of an aircraft. Now, granted, with all of the reports that have happened with people shooting down drones, none of them have actually been charged with the federal crime of damage or destruction of an aircraft. Mainly, they were charged with criminal damage to property, and when a firearm was used, they were charged with a reckless discharge of a weapon, usually within city limits. So with the destruction of drones, especially threatening drones, there are only a handful of agencies that can take them down. One would be Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Energy, and the Department of Justice. And since downing an aircraft is a federal offense, it makes sense that only these federal agencies have the authority to intercept and destroy, if necessary, any kind of threatening drone. Now, one bill that was proposed, it proposed the Drone Act of 2023. Now, granted, the weaponization would still be subject to the $25,000 penalty. It also stated that if a weaponized drone was used and it caused injury or death and destruction of more than $5,000, property destruction of more than $5,000, the operator could be charged with death or up 1 year or more in prison. And with the destruction and damage to aircraft, At the moment, it is still a federal offense to damage an aircraft, whether it's a manned aircraft or a drone. However, this Drone Act of 2023 proposed to include additional language stating that an aircraft is a vessel of the United States or subject to the jurisdiction of the United States that is carrying one or more passengers. And since currently, drones cannot carry passengers, that would be a very clear distinction between drones and aircraft. So drones would no longer be afforded the same protections as aircrafts are. Also, whether the drone is armed or not, if a drone is used in the commission of a felony, you're still going to be charged with that act, whether it would be death or more than 1 year in prison. And also, with the clarification between what defines an aircraft and what defines an unmanned aerial system being the carrying of one or more passengers, one thing that's coming in rather quickly is air taxis. It's an AI powered drone that is designed to transport passengers from one place to another. Now, when the air taxi is empty, it will be considered a drone because it is not carrying a passenger. But as soon as a passenger enters this air taxi, since it is carrying one or more passengers, it would then be afforded the protections of any other manned aircraft in the US's jurisdiction. Now, with states, they are taking initiative to regulate things as best they can, but it is kind of all over the map. For example, California has a law that deems drones are military equipment, and in order for law enforcement to use drones, they have to receive approval from local legislation to use these drones. Mississippi, on the other hand, has enacted the Mississippi Unmanned Aircraft Systems Protection Act of 2021. That allows law enforcement to use drones at any time, unrestricted, as long as it is for a lawful use. So they don't have any restrictions on the use of drones. It just has to be a lawful reason for using the drone. Florida has also enacted a law that allows the use of drones for traffic management and for evidence collection at a crime scene. And use of a drone at a crime scene to collect evidence is much better, and you're less likely to disturb any evidence than you would just walking around, because the drone has a very small footprint, and the only possibility would be if the prop wash from the rotors decided to push something around, but you'd have to be fairly close to the ground for that to happen. The one thing they did include in that act that I thought was kind of weird was they have prohibited law enforcement from using drones to issue citations. And granted, I don't know how that would necessarily work, having a drone issue you a citation. I would pay to see it happen, but since it's against the law, I probably won't see it happen. And now, most states consider it a felony to operate a drone over a correctional facility. And then Wisconsin, for example, it's still a felony to operate a drone over the correctional facility. However, if you have authorization from the controlling agency of that correctional facility, then you would be able to operate the drone over it. But I can understand why it's a felony. People try to smuggle in drugs, weapons, cell phones, SIM cards, anything, basically a whole bunch of contraband. So I can understand why most states deem it a felony to operate a drone over a correctional facility. So with everything that's happening, how quickly drones are evolving, and how the regulations are struggling to keep up, how do we go? How do we go from here? You have to be aware of the current laws that are affecting your situation. You know, it's not necessarily going to be the same for everybody. For example, if you're operating a commercial drone, you have to be more aware of 14 CFR Part 107 than you would if you're a recreational flyer. That just means you have to keep it below 400 feet and essentially use your common sense when you're flying it. Also, it helps to remain ahead of the curve. You know, pay attention to what's coming down. There could be new legislation that's introduced or that's being proposed. Just make sure you keep that in the forefront of your mind. And if there is a new regulation that is changing or it's going to be enacted, don't wait to change it until the day it's enacted. If you know it's going to be coming into law 3 months from now, start working on a plan today, so that way you can potentially avoid any kind of fines or penalties or even jail time, depending upon what the change is, if you don't comply with it. And of course, ignorance to the law is no excuse. There have been plenty of times where I've seen somebody do something, police come up to them, say, hey, what you're doing is illegal, we're going to have to arrest you. Their defense is, I'm sorry, I didn't know. But that phrase never really keeps the handcuffs off you in a situation like that. So it does, ignorance to the law does not benefit you at all. So where does the Bible fit into all of this? And in my searching, one of the I felt most fitting verses was Romans 4:15. For the law brings wrath, but where there is no law, there is no transgression. And I thought that was very fitting because the use of drones has greatly increased over the past 20 years, and regulations are struggling to keep up. And a key reference point would be, at the moment, if you attach a weapon to a drone and you kill somebody with it, that's a $25,000 fine, and that's it. I feel that's not exactly a just punishment for the act committed. So there really is there are very few laws governing what you can and can't do with the drones, especially if you're creative enough. So where there's a lack of laws, it's not necessarily that you're doing something wrong, it's just that the laws aren't there to correct it or prevent it, for that matter. So overall, drones are advancing much faster than the regulations are able to keep up. And because of that gap in advancement and regulations, um, there are things that slip through the cracks or things that happen that nobody anticipated would. So the gaps need to be closed with regulations and laws to protect not only the operators but passengers, if air taxis are becoming a thing, and bystanders, because just because somebody's not involved in it doesn't mean they can't get injured by a drone that falls out of the sky. And the regulations, they might have been sufficient before, but they are no longer sufficient enough to regulate the use of drones efficiently. So we need to refine the regulations, add more regulations, more laws, so the proper punishment can go with the proper crime, and we can also give proper protection to those that need it. Thank you for your time and your attention on this matter. These are the references that I've used for this project. And once again, thank you very much.